My wife had a long affair with my friend. I caught them red-handed and exposed them by printing out their secret messages. When you're with someone for 12 years, you develop a kind of sixth sense about them. It's not about catching them in lies or monitoring their behavior. It's about those tiny shifts in the atmosphere of your shared life. That's why I first noticed something was different with Audrey last fall, right after she landed the biggest contract of her graphic design career. The changes were subtle at first. She started having intense work calls behind closed doors, which wasn't like her. She usually lounged on the couch, sketching and chatting with clients casually. She began staying late at the office, coming home with a kind of electric energy I hadn't seen in years. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night to scribble in her notebook, saying she had breakthrough ideas. I was thrilled for her success, even if it meant seeing less of her. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, a chance to prove herself to the major tech firm that had hired her. When Blake, my best friend since college, offered to help her with the business side of things, it made perfect sense. He'd been looking for a distraction anyway, something to keep his mind off his messy divorce from Jenny. The three of us had always been close. Blake was there when I first met Audrey at that pretentious art gallery opening where I'd felt so out of place. He'd encouraged me to ask her out, helped me plan our engagement, was the best man at our wedding. Now he was stepping up again, offering his corporate expertise to help Audrey navigate her biggest professional challenge. But then the strange things started happening. Small things. Things that shouldn't have bothered me, but somehow did. The first real red flag appeared during our wedding anniversary dinner. Audrey was distracted, checking her phone every few minutes. When I joked about her secret admirer, she didn't laugh like she usually would. Instead, she launched into a detailed explanation about project deadlines and client expectations. But I caught her slipping her phone face down under her napkin when she thought I wasn't looking. Later that night, a text notification lit up her screen. Everything's set for tomorrow. Don't forget the USB. It was from Blake. When I asked about it, Audrey said he was helping her prepare for a big client presentation. She'd been having trouble with her laptop lately. Random crashes, files disappearing. Blake had offered to back up her work on his more reliable system. The next day, I decided to surprise her at her office with lunch. The receptionist said Audrey was in a meeting at Blake's corporate office across town. Nothing unusual there. He'd been mentoring her on client relations. But when I called Blake's office to see if they wanted to join me for lunch, his secretary said he'd taken a personal day to deal with divorce paperwork. That evening, Audrey came home looking tired but happy. She talked about the successful presentation, how Blake's coaching had helped her nail it. She even showed me the client's enthusiastic email response. Everything added up perfectly. Too perfectly. Maybe a week later, I found a crumpled receipt in her car while looking for my sunglasses. It was from a coffee shop downtown, time-stamped during her supposed client presentation, 2 cappuccinos and 2 croissants. The same order she and I used to share on our weekend dates. Jenny's call came late one night, her voice shaking. She needed to talk about Blake, about their divorce. I stepped onto the back porch so I wouldn't wake Audrey. He's different, Jenny said. Started staying late at work, going to the gym, being secretive with his phone. Then out of nowhere, he says he wants a divorce. No real explanation, no trying to fix things. 12 years of marriage, and he just checked out. My stomach tightened. The changes she described in Blake mirrored Audrey's recent behavior, the sudden interest in fitness, the guarded phone, the late nights. But correlation isn't causation, right? People change all the time for innocent reasons. Still, I found myself scrolling through old photos, studying them with new eyes. There was one from our block party 3 months ago that made me pause. Blake had his arm around my shoulder, but his body was angled toward Audrey. She was looking down at her phone, a soft smile on her face. I flipped through more photos from that day. In every other group shot, they were standing apart. That weekend, Audrey said she was meeting her sister Claire for lunch. Later, I called Claire about borrowing their beach house for Audrey's upcoming birthday. "Oh, I haven't seen Audrey in weeks," she said casually. "We should plan something soon." My chest felt hollow. Why would Audrey lie about lunch with her sister? When she came home that afternoon, her hair was slightly damp. She said it had started raining. But I'd been home all day, and the weather had been clear. I didn't want to become the kind of husband who snoops, But the lies were piling up. Claire wasn't the only one. Audrey had told me she was having dinner with her coworker Lisa last Tuesday, but Lisa's Instagram showed her on vacation in Mexico. When I mentioned this casually, Audrey didn't miss a beat. Did I say Lisa? I meant Melissa. You know, the new designer? Small lies. Perfectly reasonable explanations. But they started to form a pattern I couldn't ignore. Our weekly couples game night with Blake and Jenny had been a tradition for years. After Jenny moved out, Blake still came over. But now he and Audrey would often end up in intense conversations about his divorce while I cleaned up or made drinks. One night, I came back from the kitchen early and caught the end of their whispered exchange. "We can't keep dash." Audrey stopped abruptly when she saw me. Blake suddenly became very interested in his phone. The next day, I drove past Blake's house on my way to work. Audrey's car was in his driveway at 7:30 in the morning. When I texted her asking about breakfast, she replied that she'd left early for a meeting downtown. I sat in my car around the corner for an hour, watching. When she finally came out, she was wearing different clothes than she'd had on that morning. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. The image of Audrey leaving Blake's house in different clothes kept playing in my mind. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before, how she always angled her laptop screen away from me, how she'd step outside to take certain calls, how her eyes would light up when her phone buzzed with a specific notification sound. Then came last Thursday. I was in our home office, looking for tax documents, when I found a small jewelry box hidden behind some files. Inside was a silver bracelet I'd never seen before with an inscription, "For the moment stolen in between, B." The receipt was still in the box, dated 2 months ago. I photographed everything and put it back exactly as I'd found it. That evening, during dinner, I noticed Audrey wasn't wearing her wedding ring. She claimed she'd taken it off to do dishes, but I'd heard the shower running earlier. Her wrists were bare too. No silver bracelet in sight. I decided to test something. "Jenny called again," I said casually. "She's suspicious about Blake's frequent business trips." Audrey's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "That's too bad. But you know how Jenny can be paranoid about things." "Funny thing is," I continued, watching her face, "Blake hasn't taken any business trips recently. I know because I've seen his car. At different places. Different times." Part 6. The color drained from Audrey's face. Her hand shook as she set down her fork. "What are you trying to say?" she whispered. "I think you know exactly what I'm saying." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo of the bracelet. "Moments stolen in between? That's quite poetic of Blake." She stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "You went through my things? Like you went through our vows?" The calmness in my voice surprised even me. "I saw you leaving his house yesterday morning. Different clothes. Audrey? Really?" She started pacing, running her hands through her hair. "It's not. You don't understand. Blake and we never meant." "How long?" When she didn't answer, I raised my voice for the first time. "How long has this been going on?" Before she could respond, the front door opened. Blake walked in using his emergency key, freezing when he saw the scene before him. Audrey standing there with tears streaming down her face, me holding up the phone with the bracelet photo. "I guess knocking isn't necessary when you're sleeping with my wife," I said. Blake raised his hands defensively. "Listen, man, we need to talk about this. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, a hollow sound. "Let me simplify it for you. Show him the bracelet, Audrey. Show him what moments stolen in between gets you these days." Part 7. Blake stepped toward me, still playing the reasonable friend. "Just let us explain. We never wanted to hurt you. Like you never wanted to hurt Jenny?" I turned to Audrey. "Did you two laugh about it? Planning your little meetings while I was sitting right there during game nights? While I was visiting my dying mother?" Audrey flinched at that. "Your mother? That's when it started. You were so distant, so wrapped up in your grief. Blake was there. He understood. I was distant because I was losing my mother." The words exploded out of me. "And you two took advantage of that. My best friend and my wife, planning your future while I was planning a funeral." "It wasn't like that," Blake insisted. "It just happened. We tried to fight it." I pulled out one final piece of evidence. Printouts of their messages that I'd found synced to our shared laptop. Tried to fight it? For 6 months you've been meeting in hotels, planning weekend trips when I was working. You even bought plane tickets for next month. The silence that followed was deafening. Audrey had stopped crying, her face a mask of shock as she recognized their private conversations laid bare before us. I want you both out of my house, I said quietly. Blake, leave your key. Audrey, pack what you need for tonight. I'm calling Jenny tomorrow. She deserves to know the truth. I turned to leave the room, then stopped. You know what's funny? For 12 years, I thought we were the lucky ones, the couple that made it work. Turns out we're just another statistic. As I walked upstairs, I heard them whispering urgently to each other. Already a unit, already planning their next move. But it didn't matter anymore. Sometimes the best revenge is just walking away and letting people live with what they've done.